Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first breakout session. Thank you for joining us to discuss new work development as audience relationship development. We hope you'll make use of the session chat on the right side of your screen to uplift the words, images, or practices that inspire you and to share your own take on the ideas that emerge. You can also use the Q&A section to ask the panelists any questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can.
That is true. If you have any tech needs, like me, throughout this session, you can tag Team NNPN in the session chat or in the event chat if you need, and we'll help you get things squared away. Don't worry, Rose will be in charge of that, not me. And now I am so delighted to introduce our moderator for this conversation. I'm going to get back over to where I can actually see our friends. Here they are. Our moderator, Lindy, you don't have to leave, but I don't think we need you on camera, love. Thank you. Our moderator for this conversation, Haley Nelson, a dramaturg, a playwright, a podcaster, a creative producer. Haley is currently wrapping up her second year as an NNPN producer in residence at Kitchen Dog Theater, which is also where I happened to be a producer in residence, and that's not the only kinship I feel with Haley because she's a rock star. And now I'll pass it over to Rose.
Another former NNPN producer in residence, panelist Dr. Maria Patrice Amen is a scholar, dramaturg, director, producer, and serves as an associate artistic director and Latinx projects producer at San Diego Rep. She's also a co-founder and co-artistic director of San Diego's Studio Theater. We also have panelist Peggy McCowan, associate producing director of Contemporary American Theater Festival, where she has also designed costumes and scenery. And in 2018, Peggy was named West Virginia Artist of the Year.
Oh, I bet that's me. I bet it's me. It's me. It's me. Here I am. Haley, Patrice, Peggy, thank you for being with us and sharing your insights. Rose and I are going to see y'all in the chat. And I'll be back briefly at the end, internet's willing, of this conversation. Take it away, Haley.
So much. Hi, Patrice. Hi, Peggy. Good to see you. Happy Saturday. I'm so thrilled to be moderating this panel and to discuss new work development as audience development and audience engagement. If you have any additional parts of your introduction you'd like to chime in with, I would welcome you to do that. Otherwise, we can get right into it. Great.
Nothing else to add, yeah.
Cool, great. So since we're going to be talking about audiences, I thought it might be useful for us to sort of talk about defining that word audience in this current moment. I feel like over this past year, the word audience and who we're speaking about when we say that word has really shifted from live and in person to digital or distance. I think we've all started thinking about, are we serving our local community members? Are we serving our subscribers, the entire country, because now we're digital? So I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on just that word audience and who do you think that word encompasses in this moment?
Do you want to start us off?
I was looking at you, Patrice, to start.
Cool. I'll start this one. You'll take the next one. Audience for us at San Diego Rep traditionally was in person, but moving to the quarantine period, we really had the opportunity to expand out. I think I look to our Latinx festival and our J-Fest as like examples of how we can really reach beyond our geographic limitations. In that festival, which happened September of last summer, like we really did see a significant growth in who was joining us on the platforms. We also were on Hopin and had the opportunity to have people chat in their land acknowledgements and really got to see the breadth of the work the breadth of our audience in very exciting ways because of the cultural specificity of that project, knowing that we may not have only interest here in San Diego, we may have interest, and we did have people across the US and joining us simultaneously for a really cool event. Yeah, our audience for our online things is really so much beyond geographic boundary. It'll be exciting to see how that continues to grow and manifest when we move to in-person and some new hybrid things that we're doing.
Yeah, great. Peggy, any thoughts to add?
Well, I was just going to mention, I actually went to the festival this year because it was virtual and I was able to get there, right? So that was exciting to have that opportunity. But I just want to emphasize, I think it's all as well. I think it's hybrid, and I'm really excited about what that means for us moving forward.
Great. Peggy, you've got this echo underneath when you're speaking. No, it's beautiful. It adds so much gravity. I love it. It's like,
I'm out of fix it.
Great. So now that we've kind of thought about that word audience, I'm thinking about, so taking it step by step, your theater decides to produce a new play in an upcoming season, or you decide to commission a new work. How should we think about our audience within that process? So in other words, what role do you think the audience should play in the decision-making, the artistic programming process? Furthermore, is our role sort of to find and serve our audience entertainment, or are we supposed to be the tastemakers or the challengers?
I think that we are facilitators, and I think we are magic makers for change. And so when I think of the Contemporary American Theater Festival, we do all new work that nobody's ever heard of anyway. So they are coming for the experience, the relationship with the artist, the community, and the story. And our job as producers and the artists of the theater is to ensure that that experience is as unique and wonderful as possible, and that they feel engaged and access to the art. But whether they like it or not, I can't answer that question. I can't predict that question. And I know that people come to our theater and walk out of it hating some things and loving things. So they have taste. I'm not trying to change their taste. I'm trying to provide opportunities for them to see the most profound storytelling that we can. So I think I'm a facilitator.
I think it's a really interesting question of when does the audience's perspective come into that process of not just new play selection, but like the development of the pieces. And like on our festival, they come in really, really early, and I try intentionally to blur the line between audience and not audience. That's not a very specific term, but I try to blur the line between audience and not audience, because like our readers team for the festival is 80 people. And that's a lot of readers, but it also really expands out who that like gatekeeper is. Because we have so many readers reading the plays, that makes the distinction between those who are the selectors and those who are watching the pieces eventually like feel very fluid and very, very loose. So if we bring in the audience at different points, then the traditional, like, you're only going to see it when it's on the stage, it changes the nature of like who is audience and what is the role of the audience. And it's less for me than about tastemaking and about like being the gatekeeper or being the person who like forecloses the possibility of seeing the thing, but being a person who sees the path that pieces take along the way, and knowing that like each piece is going to be at a different point in its journey and in its path, and finding the ones that are speaking to the moment of today. And how do we all be in the conversation about the moment of today? Or as many people want to be in that conversation, right? It's a lot of work being a reader. So inviting more people into that process, I think, is a big project.
Yeah, I really love that. I think it sort of touches on this other question I had, which is, I think a lot of the ways that we sort of assess the taste or the interest or how we can serve our audience is through either those demographic surveys for grants or through our subscribers who we have closer relationships with than maybe some of our single ticket holders. And, I think a lot of our single ticket holders, we don't have that same intimate relationship with. So we try to assess them based on that demographic information. And that's not really it doesn't really tell us who they are or what they're interested in. So having that large group of readers at the top of your festival, it seems like a really great way to gauge what they are interested in and what feels relevant to them and to your community.
Yeah, it's a big question. Like in artistic discussions at the theater, we've had, well, we want to serve the community. And then I'm like, well, there is no monolith of the community. There isn't like a box that you put the question in, like, what do you want, that it comes out. There's 40,000 different people in the community, and each one has a different set of priorities. So even in like culturally specific groups, like the Latinx community within San Diego, as small as that gets, there's still a ton of variety and a ton of depth there. And to say like all Latinos like this thing is, then we run into like the same issues of like the lack of diversity and the lack of like nuance that we're going to see like written large across the field. So how do we do that? Like we have to have conversations, and we have to like have those voices in all stages of selection, all stages of development.
I was going to add something based on what you're saying too, which is, I think as facilitators, we also have a real responsibility to the space for the artist, right? And so enabling them to tell their story without parameters that ask questions about whether the audience will like it or whether they're going to respond to it in the way that you think is not really a great part of the creative process, right? We have to be able to support the artist to tell that story and know that the audience is a profound co-creator in that experience, and to not make assumptions about the audience. Inviting them into the co-creation is an important part of saying we need you, and how we need them throughout that process can vary every time you do it.
To touch on this a little more, because I'm hearing sort of the audience is involved in both the pre you're on stage section of this play, right? The actual development process or selection process, as well as engaging with them thoughtfully as an audience in front of you. I'm wondering how do you connect with those audiences? Is there a specific conversation you have with them? Is there a box where they put in what they want to see on stage and you read it? What are the ways that you truly assess how you're doing with your new play development as audience engagement, and also just sort of what they're interested in, how you can serve them?
Second, it's that like second part of the question that I'm like, it's a work in progress. Yeah, in our festival we have the little form, just like every other festival, where we get to hear and have like specific thoughts, and we have post-show conversations and panels with like, what are your pops, what are your wonders, what's sitting with you, what do you still have questions about, and then like a written form at the end with what's not written. I mean, when we were in person, it was written, and this year it was a Google Sheet. So amazing technology. But like, a text-based or a narrative-based response to the piece. And it's something that we're still growing towards. It's something that we're still figuring out on how to, because like, right, there's multiple purposes there. There's the idea of like the response to the playwright and specifically where the play is going. And then there's the response to the theater, and where do those 2 points overlap? And it's still a question mark that we have, that I don't know that there's a magic solution for that exists, but I think it's going to be like a continual like exchange of like how we pull both of those ideas, and can they serve in the same document, or are they separate documents?
Okay, Peggy.
Yeah, I was going to say that I really think that the audience in the process of making new plays is really a one-on-one relationship. And I think that seems like a small path when you're trying to get more people involved. But I really do think if we do it one-on-one and think of them as individuals, it helps us create a different kind of relationship. And I think allowing those individuals to come into the process in a way that they're learning more than just what this script looks like, but they're learning how this institution functions and what our mission is to do new work and why we do it and why the artist is here to do that work. The big why of it is really important to me, to get the audience to really invest and believe in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking of them as individuals, I think, is a theme I'm already seeing emerge from this conversation. And I think that's really useful. And the question, becomes how do you assess each individual when you have so many people that you're trying to get into your theaters or that you want to speak to? So maybe a question we could ask then is, once we've sort of thought about our audience as individuals, once we've engaged with this question of who really is our audience, how do we then incorporate our audiences into the new play development process itself? So I've heard sort of this reader side and thinking about them after the fact, but are there other ways that we can incorporate them in? And maybe another way to ask this question is, what are parts of the classic new play development process that aren't serving our audience, and how can we bring them in?
One way that's sort of like it's something that exists outside of the rep, but is still in the world of like the stuff that we do. This past semester, I got a little bit of funding from the university to like do like a project, and we wanted to develop a piece that was submitted to the festival, but is needed more development than the capacity that we have within our festival time. And so we picked a piece and tried to connect it with the possibility of learning. And so we created a workshop that was non-contiguous. And so traditionally in the festival, like we have people in person and we have to do 3 contiguous days of like, let's get our new play developed. And this online format gave us the capacity to like create chunks of time in between the sessions with the actors. And so we had a session with the actors and then 2 weeks of like writing time where our playwrights could like spend time with the notes or spend time with the ideas or spend time with like the responses or the readings that the actors gave, and then come back to the same group of actors 2 weeks later and like do another reading, do some more workshop time. And then again, another 2-week break. So we had 3 sessions that really broke apart and really extended the amount of time that the workshop held. And the goal of that piece was to create a recording of the version of the script that we then could share with the students because it was through a university, right? But it's the idea of like, our audiences are often unaware of the growth that a play goes over its lifetime. So we wanted to create something that these students or other, in another context, a future audience could see and that could read an early draft and watch a middle run and then read a later draft as this piece continues through its life. And I think it's something of changing the format with which we develop plays and seeking a shift away from like that the production has to be the goal and maybe the process is the goal. How does the arc change over the time in this one workshop? How does it change in another? And can we hold pieces of it for the function of like that moment snapshot, knowing that it's going to continue to change and shift over time? And also rethinking the structure in which we put things in. And that'll like reverberate out to the audience. Because at this point, the audience is not all the way over here. The audience is here in the middle of it. There's a lot of vulnerability of the artist in that process and a lot of like need to be very upfront and clear of the expectations and framing of what the piece is in that moment, that it's a snapshot and that it's for an educational purpose. So not to imply that this is something that we should take into the theaters, but I think there's lessons there about how to break apart our traditional, like we have to be in person, we have to pay in a traditional way that could be incorporated outside of it.
Just want to add to that the idea of trust and vulnerability between the artist and the audience. And so whether you're sharing early readings or early rehearsals or whatever that may be, it's important to establish that relationship for both groups and for us as facilitators to work at that relationship.
Yeah, I saw some incredibly innovative ways for people to explore process and educate their audience, you know, even during this quarantine time. There was one show that I was working on where the playwright edited their play in real time on a Google Doc while the audience was watching. And I thought that that was really useful because the audience can see how we're responding to our actors and what a difference that makes. And I think it also educates our funders about how important this new play development thing we do is. So I'm glad to hear that that was also your discovery. I'm wondering, how are some other ways, just I'm learning so much from your stories, what are some other experiences that you've had with using new play development for this audience engagement and audience development? And can you speak a little bit about just some stories that you have? Can you share with us?
Trying to think of one that's like interesting or engaging. I'm like, oh, I can tell you about some like ones that just weren't as comfortable. Let's see. Let me think.
Uncomfortable or boring, everything is educational at this point, you know. So we're all collectively bringing.
We've done so much over Zoom. Like one bit, like how audience feels. It feels like audiences are kind of over Zoom, or like dipping down in like their desire to be in a mediated format. I have a big question on like, what is going to be the future of this tool? Because it's proven so useful, right? Like it's limited, like, oh, I hate like when we go on break and then our cameras turn off and then I'm like sitting here like with the 2 minutes to go where like we would just have casual conversations in person, but I'm literally sitting in front of my camera with the screen off waiting to like the click to like start to be able to come back in person. And even in those moments of frustration, I think this tool is so useful because I've been able to connect with dramaturgs from Florida and dramaturgs from the Pacific Northwest that like I just couldn't I couldn't afford to bring them into San Diego in the before times. And now I can have their expertise in the space. I can have their voice in the conversation that really does explode out like the possibilities of what it is. I also think that it's so much more like compassionate to people's time in a way that we can schedule a meeting to the flexibility of the dramaturg, the director, and the playwright, as opposed to like shoving it into this really compressed time space. Yeah. So like I love this tool. I find it incredibly frustrating, but I love this tool. I worry about audiences burnout in the tool and how we can continue to like make it a useful thing. And my intuition is that the really specific work is going to be the thing that makes it feel necessary in the future. Like Peggy being able to join our festival from across the US, like because it's culturally specific work, we know that like we're probably not going to be able to maintain a giant audience in San Diego, but we know that there are pockets across the US of people who are interested in this specific type of work. So I wonder what the future of the tool is.
I think one of the advantages is the audience relationship, because in this format, I can see people's individual faces. They have their names, right? Whereas in our live experiences, when I'm talking to audience or artists, I don't always get all that information. So when it is an intimate conversation like this on this format, and how you can tie that into the various aspects of a play, I think you have a more intimate relationship. And I think it goes back to the potential of that one-on-one relationship. So I see many ways for us to continue using it to do development for the artist and development for the audience.
I love that idea, Peggy. Like I was on a project in Florida with Matt Stabile's company down there, and they pre-recorded and then played the audio during the session, the live session. We would just be hearing the audio of the reading, and you get to see, and like they encourage audience members to keep their cameras on so that like you can see the people's like reactions to things. It is the component that like we miss when we're only looking at the performers. We don't get to do the moment of like, or like hearing the sniffles. We just saw it in the Heights and like in a movie theater, and like heard people crying in that big, no spoilers, but like the big moment of like emotional, and heard the sniffling, and I was like, I can't believe how much I've missed that in Zoom you have the capacity to like see the audience respond to it when you frame it in a way that drives audience response.
I guess that's also, very that sense of, are they laughing? Are they crying? Are they sniffling? All of those, I think, are also really key barometers in understanding our relationship with the audience. Are we connecting? Is this landing? Is this something you enjoy? Did we choose correctly? That makes sense to me that, that's something that's really key to this. And it is something we lose in Zoom. But I think it is something people are beginning to innovate around. So I'm sort of excited to see what comes out of that next generation.
We're experimenting this year. We're doing our Latinx festival in September. You're all invited. Please come join. And we're going to be hybrid. So we're remotely rehearsing and remotely performing, but having a live watch party and bringing our playwrights to San Diego so that they can see audiences respond to their piece. Because that's the thing that like Zoom, like, because we're just showing our actors. We don't show that audiences don't turn on their cameras, and like we miss that component of it. How do you know if a beat lands if you can't actually measure a beat landing?
That's I also really appreciate this sort of. Go ahead. Was somebody talking? No. Okay. I think it's really interesting reframing Zoom as a tool rather than like a genre. Like we've heard a lot about Zoom theater, but not using Zoom for theater. So I sort of appreciate that language. And, while we're talking about sort of tools and the audience reaction as being crucial to understanding that audience connection, I wonder what other ways we sort of have of assessing when we've done it, when we've connected with our audience, when we understand that, we have served them. Do you have any advice sort of in that regard of how do we assess whether we are actually serving our audience, whoever we've decided that is?
I think we have to provide opportunities to listen to them. And I would be curious, I'm sure many other theater folks out there have had audience members who do not hesitate to share their opinions. Right? They let us know. I think it is on our end where we have not done the best work to really listen to the responses and to take some of that commentary seriously. And so as many direct conversation opportunities as we can provide around our work to listen to how they talk about our work, I think is very important. And we have to listen differently and think about what that means when they talk to us.
Can you facilitate any of those conversations, Peggy? And what does that look like?
Yes. We offer an entire series called Talk Theater. So there are pre-show conversations, post-show conversations. There are dialogues with the playwrights. There are dialogues with the actors. There are dialogues with stage managers. We have almost every artist involved in a conversation with audience at some point during the repertory experience. And one of our staff facilitates them all. I facilitate most of them. And you really learn what the audience thinks, in part by the questions they ask the artist, but then the way the artist also works and responds with them. So.
Have those conversations adapted your work afterwards? Like when you learn this information from the audiences, when you're able to assess these questions and sort of see what they're interested in, what does your organization then do to respond?
Well, we have one really great example. So we were opening a play, and there was a post-show discussion. And there were lots of questions asked about one particular scene. And the artists did the best that they could to answer that question, but they really had similar questions throughout the process too. So when the playwright heard that the same question was coming up from artist and audience, it did prompt that playwright to later rewrite the scene, right? So the next version of that play was deeply influenced by the response of the audience. And that's where I think the new play development process is really important with the audience, is for an artist to feel and hear their response and be able to move forward with that information.
I also echo Peggy's thoughts that like we have space to challenge ourselves to do better with it. It also makes me think about Danielle and Donna's comments here from the chat, and it strikes me as even in this world of virtual theater, there is so much like control that we, as like the theater makers, have over the voices of the audience, or like control over the like the behaviors of the audience. Because Donna, your comment to like encourage people to leave on their mics, because yeah, the laughter is so helpful, but I'm like, oh my goodness, like it never even occurred to me to invite that. There's so many variables there that I couldn't control as the director and producer in that piece. Like, oh my goodness, I'd be so terrified. But is that just reinforcing the like the dominant structure of how we go to theater, in terms of like, you need to be quiet, you need to come in, and here are the rules, and this is how you behave in the space? How do we revolutionize that and encourage people to listen and enjoy and partake in the capacity of which they are partaking? It's just like, it speaks to like the power of the creators to control so many elements of the audience's reception of the thing that they are creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me personally, one of the benefits of this time has been being able to have access to so many different artistic communities and, theaters from different budgets and different sizes, and being able to watch them, translate their work to online, which I think is a very clear demonstration of the values that get translated, right? Because we're trying to figure out what we're going to preserve as we move online. And I've learned a lot actually from the comedy industry during this time, because they're trying to figure out how to do shows online, but you can't have a stand-up show without people laughing. And I was really moved by the work of one of the theaters who they had their audience leave, their mics on, and they're like, you can do what you would do in a normal comedy show, but if you are disrespectful or like you take away from other people's experiences, then we're going to mute you. But that's a big amount of trust, because like you said, it's kind of scary to think about like, oh no, what if, someone's doing their dishes while they're listening to our show and they forget to turn their mic off. But to hand over that kind of trust, I think is exactly sort of the vulnerability and transparency and trust that we're all talking about. So I appreciate you, Donna, for lifting that up in the chat. I also want to, as folks continue to put questions in the chat, we've got a few minutes left. I would love to talk a little bit about Danielle's question here. What are some of the best practices for helping to faster build trust between playwrights and audience? Any advice there?
It's like, with that control thing, like at the beginning of the reading or at the beginning of the virtual space, you have so much ability to set the framework, right? To encourage the chat to be used, to give definitions to how the chat is going to be used. That it is the space in which you can begin to foster and invite in, right? To like call in your audience to be a vocal space. In past events, we've definitely used the chat function to like encourage audiences to tell us who they are and where they're coming from. And that was like, mostly like we didn't have the analytical data on our side and wanted to like capture that. But really it also sets the tone of like, you can be vocal, like you can respond, and we want you to respond because it's so flat without it. Although now they're like, done your idea. I'm like, oh, maybe we are gonna have mics on. It could be really helpful to have the laughter. Yeah, I think the setting up the framework from the very beginning is the way to foster that relationship.
Yes, I was going to second the idea of setting the framework, because even in a live conversation, I think it's important to explain what the discussion should involve. So I don't really want to engage a conversation with the audience that says, just tell me what you like and what you don't like. But can you make your questions and your comments specific to the experience you're having? Is there something that really stood out to you? Something that impacted you? Something that was emotionally challenging to you? And establishing what the sort of commitments of that conversation are from the very beginning, and giving them some examples of what we're going to talk about. And then my other thing is, never leave that playwright alone. Never leave the artist alone in those conversations.
Yeah, it's making me think about when you called us magic makers, Peggy, which I love. But, I think sometimes in considering ourselves magic makers or educators, we forget that the audience is really the thing that, if we've learned anything during this time, it's that the audience is really sort of what makes that magic palpable. We can facilitate the magic, but it's really the audience that helps us make it all come alive. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating question of how do we engage with them, in this time and as we move forward, and figuring out how we can continue to facilitate them, but also sort of widen that framework. And, as we're talking about framework, I'm wondering if either of you can speak to having to create a framework or pivot your framework. Sorry to use the word. But, how do we, for theaters that, I think we all feel overwhelmed during this time. We're short-staffed. We are trying to figure out how to do a million other things and fit in with COVID protocols. And, this idea of breaking open your new play development process, which I think we all just miss and want to get back into the way it was before. What is your advice on how people can shift resources or, begin to sort of look at this framework while taking care of their other needs? Where does this fall in their priorities? Sort of thinking about institutionally, how do we make this happen?
I say start with time. Start with the assumptions that you're making about time, because this tool changes the resource of time and money need. Right? We know if we use this tool, we can liberate some of the assumed travel costs that we have, and that can function to spread out the amount of time that we're using in a way that feels more compassionate to artists' needs and playwright capacity. And it gives us maybe more breadth, as opposed to the development window is June and that's when we're looking at it, that we have more space to live there. That we discovered in COVID that you got to teach kids and you still have to cook. And yeah, I don't have to drive places, but I still have to do an entire life and now fit on an online life on top of that. So I think time is the biggest one that requires the flexibility, and that resource, where we cannot always generate more money and cannot generate more time. How can we detach those from each other to be able to make them function more smoothly?
I think we have to ask the question, what do we have to lose, right? If we don't adapt and we don't work to make our audience the priority and the way that we work with our audience, what do we lose? If our audience stops coming, if our audience stays sort of status quo, how does that affect the long-term health of the institution, right? It affects us financially. It affects the morale of the artists. It affects the magic, the experience. We have to keep sight, I think, when I say we, I really do mean my theater too. We have to keep sight of that goal with a kind of discipline and resiliency. It's hard. It's hard to make the time. It's hard to dedicate the commitment. But if we don't, what will we lose? And I think the pandemic has shown us what we lose. So you just have to kind of keep sight of the question. If we don't do it, we don't really exist.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It sort of touches on, I had a question about why is this work worth doing? Like why go to the trouble of figuring out how to break open this process, or why, engage the audience, or why not just sort of try to focus on ticket sales rather than actual engagement in this process. And I think that's a great testament as to why, even if we think about the health of the institution, I think that's still a great why. Patrice, do you have anything to add as to why is this work worth doing?
Right, because we should break down all of our assumptions. I'm like, because it's good. That's why you do it. I think for me, it has long been the access point for artists of color. New work development is how I find the artists who were never a part of the canon before and were not introduced to me in my my theatrical education. I also think it is how we continue to make theater necessary. It's existed for 2,000 years. Wonderful, that's great for it, or many thousands of years. I need to brush up on my theater history. It's existed for a very long time, but that doesn't necessitate that it continues to do so, unless it speaks to us in the today and why the lives we lead today matter, or that they function, or they contribute, or that they have purpose. What is the point of what we do? I think the new play world is how we talk to the world today. Yes, Shakespeare's important. Yes, Aristotle, the Greeks and all that, but also they are long dead. And how do we contribute to the universal ideas of their time to our time today? Otherwise we would just go back then. We're not alive back then. I do see partially my distraction is I didn't answer the questions in the Q&A. And Lindy, no, the 80 readers are not paid, and it is a problem. And then I am working towards solution, but I'm not there yet. Yeah, 80 people, but they do choose the level at which they're reading. I just wanted to touch back on that.
I just wanted to follow up Patrice said. I think theater is the artistic medium of community, right? And so it is our responsibility to reflect our community, to profoundly work with our community, and to make the art that is of our community, right? And so that's why the new work is so relevant to keeping these institutions moving forward.
So much. Thank you both. We're actually at time, and I think that's a perfect way to end. I encourage those of you that had questions in the Q&A. I'm sorry if I couldn't get to you, folks in the chat. Continue having these conversations, with all of us while we're here this week. It's always something that I'm eager to talk about. And thanks, Jess, for having me.
Oh my word, you three, fierce queen, goddess people. Thank you so much for a really inspiring conversation. Some of the things I was furiously scribbling in my notebook are things like, we have to make theater necessary. We have to ask what we could lose. The idea that we have the ability to set the tone at the top of these events and invite the audience's full selves in. And the idea that they have taste. We don't need to try to change their taste. They already have it. Dang. Thank you all. Thank you